The key words here I want to sort of hone in on is the idea of human interactions. My point is going to be that they're still absolutely necessary, but they're shifting in terms of what they look like. Like the expectation is they are at the critical decision points, and they are when you are to help people handle the complex, high-stake sort of decision.
Welcome to the Emblazers Show, where B2B leaders are igniting revenue. I'm your host, Abby Kerr. And on today's episode, we're bringing you a replay of Tim Riesterer's opening keynote from Corporate Vision's 2026 virtual conference, Next Revenue Summit. In a market that feels increasingly unpredictable, Tim tackles a question every B2B revenue leader is asking right now. Where does AI truly help, and where do human skills still win? Drawing on data from 150,000 B2B decisions, he explains why buyers still want human engagement at critical moments, where interactions are most predictive of wins and retention, and how leading teams can use AI to better assess, coach, and scale the skills that drive predictable growth. A little bit more about Tim. Tim Riesterer is Chief Strategy Officer at Corporate Visions, and he is the sought-after expert on evidence-based revenue growth using counterintuitive approaches. Known for his candid thought leadership, which you hear every week on the podcast, and engaging keynotes, he's spent decades testing and refining go-to-market strategies that put buyers squarely at the center. Tim is the author of 4 insightful books, including Customer Message Management, Conversations That Win the Complex Sale, The 3 Value Conversations, and The Expansion Sale. Let's watch the keynote replay right now.
When COVID hit, we had an event called Mastering Virtual Selling, which seemed quite pressing at the time because we were living in unprecedented times. If I heard that word once, I heard it too many times during COVID. Everything was unprecedented, this, unprecedented that. But it was like most of us hadn't lived through a pandemic before, so everything was new, everything was different. I tried to think of a different word or words to describe the times we're living in now. And so I don't even know if I can really pronounce this well, but unprecedentedly unpredictable. Like, I'm not sure in my lifetime that I've seen this much chaos. COVID was like a thing, a global thing, and we were all experiencing it. But now it's like there are dumpster fires everywhere, and they're not all the same. And then the through line under all of it is AI is changing the entire world and everything we do and how we're going to do it. So it is not only unprecedented, it's unprecedentedly unpredictable. But there's a reason you're here today, because in the midst of all this unpredictability, we're being asked something by our boards, our CEOs, our CFOs, because they can. They're saying, I know it's unpredictable out there, but could you please deliver some pleasantly predictable revenue growth? And if you don't mind, I'd appreciate if you could do that in the double digits. And if you don't mind, I'd appreciate if you could do that with less. And so in a world of unpredictable, everybody's demanding predictable, and they're looking at us, the revenue growth teams. That's why I think you're here today. And it's the question we ask, and why we're calling it the Next Conference is that everybody's wondering, so what does the next look like for sales performance, excellence, productivity in a world of unpredictable where everybody wants predictable? So that's the question we're looking to answer today. So I've chosen the topic where AI stops, even though it's not stopping for nothing, no how, no one, but it has a limitation we're starting to see in some data out there. And the key being that we're going to talk about human skills that are still winning, that there's an opportunity for us fellow humans who are selling to humans to still do our part and, in fact, perhaps play the most important difference-making part. And I want to start with a piece of data from Gartner. I think this is fascinating. If anybody follows Gartner, you might be like, oh, I see the 75% number. I know what you're going to tell me. The 75% of buyers want a rep-free, no salesperson involved experience. Well, you'd be right, but that would be so 2 years ago. Recently, there was a blog put out by the very same Gartner that said by 2030, just a few short years, 75% of B2B buyers want to prioritize human interaction over AI. I find this fascinating. I find it to be a stunning reversal. I find it to be sort of a be careful what you wish for. I wished for a rep-free experience. Now I'm awash in data and information, and I can't make a decision. What they said specifically is that these buyers expressed a preference for human engagement. This is important at critical decision points in complex, high-stakes transactions. So two things. One, they're accepting that not complex, not high-stakes transactions are probably going to go rep-free. But we still need reps in these particular B2B decisions where it's multi-step, multi-decision maker, complex environments where they are now steeped in information from their AI searches. And now there's a decision to be made, and somebody's got to help them make that and help them feel confident about that decision. So there's a role to play in probably your organizations for your salespeople for years to come, because this is projected out to 2030. The key words here I want to sort of hone in on is the idea of human interactions. My point is going to be that they're still absolutely necessary, but they're shifting in terms of what they look like. Like the expectation is they are at the critical decision points, and they are when you are to help people handle the complex, high-stake sort of decision. So I think it's important to start to ask the question, what do those human interactions look like? For the last 2 years, since I heard the previous statistic, rep-free, what I've been hearing from sales leaders is we need a better methodology. We need consistent milestones. We need to be able to run a predictable sales process. And we need to be able to track and drive productivity and velocity. That's interesting, and that seems right when it's just a volume game. But when you hear the buyer coming back and saying, wait, I have certain expectations that are probably different than what you've got in your sales process. That's good for you, but here's the experiences or the interactions I'm looking for. And it's those things that are going to actually create progress in your deals, the things that you're then going to have to measure, but you have to make them happen before you can measure them. And so we think there's a difference, and that is that human interactions, the ones that buyers are begging for, need to be looked at much more closely so that when we have humans in the loop, if you will, that they're doing the right things and they're getting the right responses. So today I want to talk in my section about 3 items that lead to greater, more consistent, predictable, winning human interactions that matter to your buyers. And the first thing that we need to talk about is that you need to know which interactions are actually winning interactions. Like, where should you place your bets? When you talk about hiring and then you talk about onboarding, training, coaching, like, what does that talent need to look like? What do they need to be able to do? And how do you make them better at that? And that list is now it's a modern list of things that the buyer expects after the work they've done with AI is done, and now they want your human. What is that list, and how are you making your people great at that? So that means the second part then is know what matters to buyers, what's predictive of wins and losses, and then be able to equip and enable your teams to show up that way. You need to improve the way they show up and deliver those human interactions. So we'll talk about that, and then you need to scale it. The idea of pleasantly predictable revenue growth means that you're able to put people into the engine, the human interaction engine, and they need to be able to perform, and you need to be able to keep dumping more humans in, either as you grow or your team's attrite. The idea is you need to demonstrate to everybody that this is something scalable, not just something where you need a bunch of superheroes. So know what interactions win. Make sure your people show up to deliver that way, and then scale your squad to get to success. So let's talk about knowing the interactions that win. Do you know, and how do you know for certain which interactions are actually driving wins versus losses or retention versus churn? The good news is we're studying that. So I have the pleasure of running 4 laboratories to study human decision-making, how human B2B buyers frame value, make choices. And the one I want to talk about today is the deep, rich insights and database we have around wins and losses and retention and churn, because there's a story inside the data. The first story is that when we encounter a lot of the companies that we work with, the way you determine whether or not you are doing the right things in a sales experience in terms of wins and losses is you ask your sellers, why did you win or why did you lose? Which is interesting when it's the buyer who made the decision. So I'm not saying a drop down inside your sales force is bad. It's going to tell you what sellers think, but not necessarily what really happened, because we're looking down a database of 150,000 B2B decisions, actual decision makers expressing why they chose the vendor they chose and why they didn't choose the one they didn't, or why they stayed with or churned from the vendor that they had. 150,000 of these, 50 industries, 500 different companies and their decisions, and we've learned a few things. The main thing that we've learned is I'm not sure you can trust your drop down. There's a 70% difference in the answers you get about the exact same deal when you ask your seller and ask the buyer about that exact same deal. So the question really becomes, do you really know what human interactions matter? Because more often than not, what sellers give you are not human interaction-oriented responses. It's things outside of our control. The product didn't have these features. We couldn't get there on price. The politics were not in our favor. Whereas the buyer, as you're about to see, expresses why they did or didn't choose you in terms of experiences. What did they experience? And those experiences can be quantified. In fact, they can be identified and can be determined to be predictive of wins and losses. Here's the list of human interactions that still matter. So when 75% of buyers say we still want to prioritize human interaction, these are them, because buyers have told us these are them. So when we cluster all of that structured and unstructured data from 150,000 deals, we see these clusters, and you need to read them as buyer experiences that the buyer needs and expects and will probably give you the business if you do a great job of aligning them on the problem statement and then aligning your solution to that problem. The numbers you see at the top here are area under the curve. Basically, those tell us how predictive that experience is. So if you score high here, you win 91% of the time. If you score low there and your competitor scores high, you will lose the greater share of the time. And we were able to find highly predictive experiences between 73 and 91% predictive. And then things started to fall below 0.5, which is no better than a coin flip. What fell below 0.5 are things like product knowledge, industry knowledge, ease of purchase decision. I'm not saying those things aren't important. I'm just saying they're not predictive of a win or loss, and that most likely what has to happen in the mind of the buyer is that you don't just know your product, you're able to articulate meaningful value in their words, on their terms, about what your product will deliver, and so on and so on. So these are really the experiences, the manifestation of your knowledge and expertise, not necessarily the knowledge and expertise in and of itself. So I want you to look at these 8 and think about them now as being the human interactions that matter, not from anybody's perspective other than maybe the most important, and that is buyers who made actual decisions and simply expressed which things mattered to them and then rated their experience with you and your competitors. So this list becomes very important as we think about moving forward, but I want to tell you that it is not the only list. That as we looked at this database and found that there were lots of renewal deals in these win-loss analysis, we started to see different experiences expressed on the retention and renewal side. And these experiences became indicative of whether someone would stay or go. So winning new business and dislodging a competitor, finding a new buyer or budget or a new business unit, or finding and replacing a DIYer looks like the left-hand side. Keeping the business and growing that business looks like the right-hand side. And real quickly, I want to just show you that that list is different, save for 2. So these 2 experiences, being responsive and resolving issues and being compelling and helping to tell a story that they can then tell themselves show up as important experiences, predictive of wins and losses, as well as now renewal or churn. And what I will say is that 0.53, which is almost just a coin flip, is where you will find NPS scores. While I don't have exact area under the curve, what I can tell you is these 8 that you see are showing up as higher than 0.5. So in fact, what you see in front of you are better than NPS scores at predicting retention versus churn. And so when human interactions matter, what matters is you need to know which human interactions those are. And the list that now we've got for you is that there are predictive buyer and predictive customer or client experiences that are predictive of wins and losses or renewals or churn. And that your teams, whether they do both of these or you have special teams that are dedicated to each side of the house, have a set of experiences, interactions you need to master. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is you need to know the interactions that are required to win, and those show up as predictive buyer experiences, and these can be known. Like these are known. These are today's interactions that matter when all the other things are considered. These are the things that still matter when a human in front of a human's lips are moving. So now I want to talk about how do you improve the performance of your people against those interactions? How do you actually deliver those interactions? And how do you make sure that you are compelling and you are a difference maker and a client is experiencing that? They can observe it, they can score it, and they can compare you and see you as superior to the competition. Let's talk about how to make the human in the loop better. And it starts with knowing, well, what are they good at and what are they struggling with? Where are they strong? Where are they struggling? How do you know that? What are you doing today as you hire and as you look to upskill and coach? How are you figuring out who's good at what? And how confident are you? What we see out there is a lot of self-assessing. Like you have a hiring self-assessment and you have an annual maybe self-assessment where the seller gets to score themselves against what they think they do well or don't do well. Maybe you're adding a manager perspective to that. And maybe for the more sophisticated in the audience, you're starting to pick up on some signals. We'll talk about that. But what I want to talk about is what if there was, and I'm not saying your salespeople want to hear these words, but what if there was an SAT, a standardized achievement test for sales, an SAT for sales, that when you think about it, you're like, hey, I know what salespeople are good at, not because they think about it and they score themselves, but they actually had to do it. I want to introduce you to a new world that we found at Harvard Skills Lab. So there is such a thing called Harvard Skills Lab. And what they're doing at Harvard Skills Lab is trying to turn the assessment world upside down by saying self-assessments are broken. They've always been broken, but they were the best we had. But in a world of AI now, where you can run simulations, it is now possible to have sellers and really any other complex skills cluster, like leadership, other things that are hard to measure with a self-assessment. You can actually now create performative assessments where they have to demonstrate the actual skills in the context of doing the thing. Think like a pilot in a simulator. And the idea being that you would do the sales process against a specific business case. You would do each step. And in this case, you would meet persona number 1 in initial outreach and discovery, then meet persona number 2 in the next stage, which is value proposition and solution presentation, and then persona number 3, where you got to build the business case and negotiate. And the thing that was exciting to the person that we connected with at Harvard Skills Lab is that what the hardest part of this is coming up with a data model. But the most interesting part is we were able to show him we have a data model. We've been able to find predictive buyer experiences and understand descriptively what that means to do it well or do it poorly based on all the structured and unstructured data. And that was gold to this person. And now we've been working with a company called Skillcraft, who is spun out of Harvard Business Labs to focus specifically on sales performance-based assessments. where somebody has to actually do the thing and you can compare it apples to apples and be able to show that this score connects to this performance. In other words, calibrated and validated psychometrically to prove that this is indicative of performance in each of these areas. And so what's happening now, need you to think about is, imagine having at your disposal, knowing who's good at what human interactions. Like, we know the interactions now, but now you look at your team and you're like, who needs to get better at what? And one way to think about it is the fact that AI-driven precision skills assessments through simulation are here.
What if your next big revenue move didn't come from a blog post or a cold LinkedIn scroll, but from a real conversation with leaders who've been there?
As the world of sales is constantly evolving and constantly changing, I think it's even more critical to get together with people to understand how are they helping to solve some of the problems that our buyers have today.
Meet Emblaze, a community of sharp B2B minds, CROs, CSOs, rising stars, sharing what's actually working in sales, enablement, and customer growth.
We always find a lot of value in the partnerships that we're able to form with some of the other great organizations that are part of the team here. And personally, I love the opportunity to connect with my peer group outside of other organizations and learn from them and try to figure out if there's things that they're doing that we can pull into our organization and benefit from.
Join a monthly forum, dig into science-backed strategy, and get insight you won't find in your feed. Start your Emblaze journey today at emblazegrowth.com.
And I just want to give you a quick feel for the kinds of data you can get. And I want you to imagine how you might develop, coach, move your teams around if you knew how well they could do how well they could deliver the performance needed in these human interactions, the 8 interactions for acquisition or the 8 for retention and expansion. Now imagine this is your team. This is actual data from a client of ours. Names have been changed. But what you can see is you can start to see cohorts form, and you can start to see where against each of these you may have bigger problems or bigger areas of needs. And it becomes very interesting to start to think about training less like you're spreading a bunch of peanut butter across everybody because you think this is what everybody needs, and start moving into a world where you can start to think about, well, what does Stephen need and what does Jennifer need? The idea of human interactions being preeminent and them being predictive and now being able to know who is good at what, creating a level of certainty about that, means you can intervene in a totally different way. You can profile in a different way, you can intervene in a different way, and you can think about who belongs in what teams in a different way. These are different names, but Jennifer and Steve were on the same team for the same client, and Stephen had an entirely different profile for, let's say, the top 4 things that Stephen should work on maybe by quarter in the coming year, versus Jennifer, same team, had more or less a different profile. And now you start to think about the goal, which has always been to personalize, make things rep specific, also to eliminate plausible deniability for your training, which is putting people through things they think the company needs, but they don't. And now all of a sudden there's an opportunity to say, but you do, and do that from a psychometrically validated, calibrated set of competencies that have been proven to be predictive of wins and losses, if you followed all that. And start to think about things like personalized learning journeys, or think about things like team dynamics, where you have a manager and you have a team, again, not real names, but real data. And you start to see things like, I have a team that's struggling, but I have a manager who's solid. Allison could coach on that. But I have a team that's struggling in a very important area, but maybe I can't just keep going, hey, come on, Allison, coach your team on aligning solutions to needs. You start to think differently about how you engage people in their development, and then teams in their development, and how you engage managers as coaches. In fact, maybe you engage managers as part of the development, and the way you think about coaching is, hey, there's some people who know stuff and have demonstrated themselves to be great at that thing, and now I have a cohort. Maybe there's an opportunity to do peer and mentor coaching in a way that's more meaningful than, here's somebody who's here a long time and you're new, get together, figure it out, and now you can be more precise. But here's the one I want to show you. This is the question everybody asks, and this is the one I want to answer before, just preemptively, is that's a lot of information, and the question becomes, where do you start? So one of the things that really gets interesting is when you think about your KPIs. And one of the more interesting ones is win rates. And what this particular client of ours did was they were struggling. They're halfway through the year, and their team as a whole was these 150 sellers in this region were woefully behind quota. And kind of trying to figure out how to make a difference. Like, what do we need to do different? What can I do with my team to improve them? And instead of doing a one-size-fits-all sort of initiative or training, they said, well, let's figure out who's struggling where, and then whether or not that really matters. And that's where it got interesting, where we took over here the top 25% competency scores and the lowest 25% competency scores for each of these competencies you see along the side. And then we put the trailing 12-month win rates for the top and lowest performers so we could see the difference in win rates based on who does which competencies well. And so it becomes interesting because if you think about what we're looking at here, is that in aligned solutions to needs, which is proven to be highly predictive of wins and losses, at this time for this team in this territory, it was not showing a dramatic difference in win rates between those who we assessed as high performers versus low performers in that particular competency. But what you can see is there were competencies where there was dramatic differences in win rates. When you think about that competency, high and low performers, and you compare win rates, you started to see three particular competencies for that team, that territory, that time, that was underperforming, where you could go, hey, maybe there's a there. Maybe now we know based on the team and comparing assessed competency versus win rate percentages that there are some cohorts who we can help that are struggling in certain competencies that for our team, our time, and our territory appear to be really important to the KPI we want to fix, which is win rates. And again, not real names, but real data. They were able to identify three cohorts and three opportunities to run competency-based learning intensives. So what this team did is for each cohort, they ran one per month in back-to-back months, getting people ready for the second half of the year, in particular gearing up for Q4. And they ran digital learning. So this was a all digital experience. Nobody came out of the field for this. So there was digital learning for that competency, give or take about 2 hours of online spaced learning. Week 1 of that month for that cohort. Week 2, they ran virtual instructor-led application workshops. These were 4 hours long. And so as a cohort of X number, you were divided into teams of 15, and you had your day and time where you had a 4-hour VILT application workshop, again, on that competency and the concepts you had learned in week 1. Then the following week, everybody was expected to use the job aid related, again, to that competency that they had just practiced in their VILT and had learned about in the digital learning to do AI role plays, trained on that competency and tailored by uploading your, as a participant's individual planner for a deal you're working on. And you had to do this as many times as it took to get to a passing score, and that was required for you and your cohort. Everybody had to do this. And then your manager knew if you were in that cohort, and so they knew that they needed to be inspecting that planner needs to be applied to your deals. They had the ability to give you a coaching refresh with a simple kit. So all the members of my team who were in that cohort, I'd have a lunch and learn with them. And they released some booster videos, all again related to that competency. So what I want you to begin thinking about is the difference between traditional development of your team, upskilling, coaching, training, enabling, and think less about what you think everybody needs or what they think they need, and being able to precisely assess through performative simulations what they need, and then put them into a specific chunked, spaced, online experience that includes some workshopping, but still virtual, so that you can expedite the development of these cohorts and know exactly who needs what and give them exactly what they need. And then think about how your portfolio of content to equip and enable your human interactions need to look more like the predictive experiences that customers are expressing are important to them and mean the difference between wins and losses and the difference between retention and churn. And of course, there's always the foundational skills around getting enough people to the table in the first place. And so what we're saying is companies need to think now about the predictive experiences as a competency framework for the human interactions that matter, that you need to think about how you're going to assess and find out who's good at what. And then in order to improve that, you need to reorganize your training enablement content to align to those experiences and be able to give people exactly what they need to improve the interactions that they need to improve. And so that's number 2, deliver. Now I'm going to round this out in the last few minutes with how to scale this. This is getting very interesting because like all of that sounds good, but can we do that with a level of scale and a level of pace? And the reality is we need to think about scaling these human interactions because you can't rely on heroics. You want and need the people you hire and onboard year 2, year 3, and so on to be delivering these human interactions. And you need to be able to demonstrate that when you hire people that they can get there, that you have lower attrition rates and higher performance outcomes. So how do you scale this? The first thing that you need to think about is that human interactions are really the sum of 3 parts. That human interactions are the steps you ask your teams to follow. You still need steps. And the predictive skills that are needed to execute those steps. And the stories they're going to tell. And the problem right now in most companies is that these 3 elements are usually driven by 3 different parts of your company. Whether it's operations and sales leadership, it's training, learning, and development, or it's marketing and products. The steps, the skills, and the stories all come together to sum up to a great human interaction, but they're typically done separately. What we're showing the future to look like is that these things need to be done in an integrated fashion. That 1, your sales process steps, right? The steps that you take need to look like the experiences you buyers need. Our current steps are listed as things that we want to know and care about, but the future of how you run an engagement should look more like, now what does the buyer need and what experience should we create? And now let's create that experience. It should then allow to the skills that you need to do it, because the skills for how you execute a step need to be integrated and aligned. They can't be like, this is my skills training over here, and these are my sales steps over there. And the reality is the stories, the messaging, the content that you create also needs to be in alignment. The steps, the skills, and the stories. And what we're seeing out there is that companies are neglecting, but need to do a better job of equipping and enabling teams to execute the steps 1 step at a time and know the skills that they need to prep, execute, and follow up those steps, and that they know the stories they must tell in that moment. I don't have enough time to go through this, but one of the things that we'd be happy to discuss with you is like, what does this look like step by step, stage by stage, and how do the steps, skills, and stories for each align so that you are creating a singular, great experience, differentiated experience that matches the human interactions that buyers want. And that's where we believe AI is going to start to show up, and that the world you should start to expect to see from us and others. And some of the things you're going to hear from some of the people speaking in a little bit is that this is where you're going to see AI bring this together. I like to think of this here as a 3-layer cake. The steps, the skills, and the stories are like a 3-layer cake. So I don't care what your favorite cake is, but think of it as having 3 layers. And the idea is that they all need to function in an integrated way. That's a lot. That's a load for a salesperson. So you need to imagine in the AI-driven future that there is an agent that activates all 3 of those things in stage 1 or 2, each stage. There's a layer that makes that more contextual and impactful. And then there's an ability to inspect and intervene so that these things become more precise and more specific. What do I mean by that? Is expect to see specific agents that help you accomplish specific tasks in bringing together the steps, the skills, and the story to help you perform that stage, to be an assist in performing that stage and making sure that all of these things are being activated in that stage. And then the next thing will be the enrichment layer that integrates the insights, the data, if you will, the signals that make this more contextual and make it richer and make it more deal and buyer specific. But also that enrichment layer is going to make it possible for this activation to become even more intensely specific, where you can inspect a deal and a seller and the buyers and intervene based on deal health scores, the automated coaching that's necessary, and the more prescriptive management that's needed by deal, by rep at scale. And so the picture I need you to have is that there will be stage by stage AI agents that integrate, almost like taking a slice of the cake, all three layers, and making them real, making them happen stage by stage in acquisition and in expansion. That this can all scale as you think about all that you're asking your sellers to do. Each step along the way can now be made possible as you think about getting an assist that integrates those important steps, skills, and stories, but does that in a way that it can be activated and inspected and intervened. And they're doing all of these things at the right time in the right place, creating the right interactions and experiences, but now able to actually make the behavior change, make the application of all these things, the stages and steps, the skills, and the stories. So with that, I want you to envision the next, that winning human interactions at scale look like a three-layer cake, a distinct three-layer cake for business acquisition and retention and expansion, based on, in each case, the 8 predictive experiences of wins and losses, or retention and churn, that then integrate the steps, the skills, and the stories all along the way, and with an AI assist to make sure that comes to life. And that's our vision at Corporate Visions for what we see happening next. Knowing the interactions that win, being confident, not guessing, and knowing from the buyer's perspective, being able to deliver those interactions by improving the way your teams show up, and then doing that at a level of scale where you see sustained behavior change. And as you put people into that loop, they all begin to perform that way.
Thank you so much for watching or listening to this episode of the Emblazers Show on your favorite podcast app. Please like, subscribe, rate, and review the podcast so that it can reach more revenue leaders like you. We would love to have you check out Emblaze membership if you're not already a member by going to corporatevisions.com/community. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next time.